We live in a simulation. My name is Alltime, and today we're exploring 14 reasons why some believe we live inside a simulated reality. Now, I get that it's a pretty bold claim to say we live in a simulation, but I've brought some pretty substantial evidence that by the end of this video might have you questioning everything you know. Timestamps are in the description if you want to jump around, so let's start with the basics. What do I mean living in a simulation? Well, it all comes down to the simulation hypothesis, which proposes that what humans experience as the world around us is actually a simulated reality. Now, you're probably thinking, oh, the Matrix movies. Well, this concept didn't actually come around because of the Matrix movies, but rather was popularized by them. This theory actually dates back to the 1960s and was speculated about even back in Plato's time with his Allegory of the Cave. In the Allegory, Plato speaks of people whose entire lives have been spent chained in a cave, facing a blank wall. The enslaved watch shadows projected onto that wall by objects passing in front of a fire behind them. To them, the shadows they see are reality. Now, we know that those projected shadows are not actual representations of the real world. But those still trapped in the cave watching the wall don't know any better. They perceive that to be reality. Socrates chimes in with the belief that the philosopher is like a prisoner who is freed from the cave and comes face to face with this reality, this higher level of understanding. Unfortunately, most people remain chained to the wall and do not have the desire to leave their prison, for they know no better life. As it stands now, evidence keeps building to support the theory that we live inside of a simulation. Over the course of this video, you'll hear a lot of evidence, but what might be more troubling is the lack of evidence against the simulation theory. Evidence that proves the universe is in fact real. In fact, we can't currently prove that all of this isn't a simulation. New York University philosopher David Chalmers doubts it's possible to prove that we don't live inside of a simulation. He says, you're not going to get proof that we're not living in a simulation, because any evidence that we get could be simulated. Meaning, if the simulation doesn't want us to know something, we aren't going to know it. Interestingly enough, the probability of us living in a simulation versus reality has actually been calculated. Thanks to David Kipping, an assistant professor of astronomy at Columbia University, and mathematics way above my pay grade, we currently sit at 50-50 odds. One half that this is the baseline reality, and the other half that this is not. Kipping goes on to say, the day we invent that technology, and that technology being the ability to create simulations ourselves, it flips the odds from 50-50 to us almost certainly not being real, according to these calculations. It'd be a very strange celebration of our genius that day. Yeah, it only gets worse from here. 1 minute isn't very long. A second is even less, and a millisecond is even shorter. But what's the smallest unit of time called? Well, it's called the Planck time. The Planck time is the smallest possible unit of time in physics, represented by this. Planck time represents the absolute minimum amount of time, as in there is no smaller slice of time than the Planck time, which leads to the question, why? Why can't it be smaller? Why is there a minimum amount of time? To put that in perspective, 1 second is an eternity compared to a Planck time. So here's where this ties into the simulation. If time were truly continuous, it would be infinitely divisible, as in you could divide it over and over and over again, but it's not. It has a minimum tick, like the refresh rate in a video game. Think of a movie. When played at 24 frames per second, it looks very smooth, but it's actually just individual images flipping really fast. 24 images per second. If time works the same way, made of discrete Planck time units instead of flowing continuously, then reality isn't smooth. It's just being updated really, really fast. In a video game, each frame is calculated, processed, and displayed. If our universe is doing the same thing, that means time is being computed rather than existing as a seamless flow. This is a direct parallel to how a simulation would function. If time were truly continuous, there wouldn't be a smallest possible unit. The fact that one even exists suggests a processing constraint, like a maximum refresh rate. A truly real universe would have an infinitely divisible time, a smooth, uninterrupted flow. But if time has discrete units, that means 3 things. 1. There is a fundamental refresh rate to the universe. 2. Time doesn't flow, but happens in ticks, like frames in a video game or a movie. 3. The universe is computing reality in steps rather than allowing it to exist in an infinite, uninterrupted stream. And going even deeper, the existence of Planck time is eerily similar to how computers process time. A computer can't compute an infinite number of events in a moment. That's the logic behind programming. One step, then the next, then the next, then the next. If our universe updates reality in tiny increments, rather than existing as an infinitely divisible flow, then it behaves exactly like a simulation, which is really terrifying to consider. I mean, this changes everything. If the universe operates in frames rather than a smooth flow, that's strong evidence that it's running like a simulation, processing each moment in sequential updates. Meaning if time is pixelated, then our reality is being rendered. And if it's being rendered, then something or someone is running the simulation. As we learn more and more about our world and the universe, the more it appears to be based on mathematical laws. For example, look at the Fibonacci sequence and the golden ratio. It's found in nearly everything around us. Max Tegmark, a cosmologist at MIT, says, "If I were a character in a computer game, I would also discover eventually that the rules seemed completely rigid and mathematical, and that it just reflects the computer code in which it was written." Max's comments might sound a little out there, but over time it's been winning over other brilliant minds. One such example is James Gates, a theoretical physicist at the University of Maryland. James said, "In my research, I found this very strange thing. I was driven to error-correcting codes. They are what make browsers work. So why were they in the equations I was studying about quarks and electrons and supersymmetry? This brought me back to the stark realization that I could no longer say people like Max are crazy." A lot of brilliant minds are starting to realize that just as a video game is programmed and structured logically, our world is very much the same. As humans become more intelligent and knowledge continues to amass, the rules of our reality become more apparent. Delving deeper into the concept that our reality is structured in a very rigid and mathematical way, what are some of these limitations of reality? Let's talk about a few of them. The first is the speed of light in a vacuum, given to us by Einstein's theory of special relativity. This is essentially the speed limit of the universe. But that begs the question, why? Why is there a limit to the speed in which light can travel? If we remove ourselves from this question for a second and return to the idea of video games, a potential answer arises. Video games are only limited by the weakest element running them. An underperforming CPU, a bottlenecked graphics processor, a limitation of RAM, a poorly optimized engine, etc. In all of gaming, these weakest elements create artificial limitations. For example, loading screens, draw distance, or texture pop-in. These are workarounds that are built in to accommodate the limitations. Now, let's bring it all together. The speed of light is the maximum speed limit of our universe because reality can't be rendered in less time than that. If we were to travel faster than the speed of light, we would reach a part of our universe that hasn't been rendered yet. The speed of light is an imposed limitation to keep the reality of, well, reality. If this is indeed potentially an arbitrary number set by the creators of the simulation to keep the simulation running properly, then one can assume that we can't travel faster than that because the simulation would break, and the reality of this reality would collapse. Essentially, the game would crash. If we do in fact live in a simulation, then thoughts might not just be personal experiences. They could be inputs shaping reality itself. Think of the concept of manifestation, willing something into reality, taking a thought or desire and making it happen. This idea isn't just philosophical. It's supported by strange phenomena that suggest reality behaves more like an interactive program than a fixed objective world. Let's start with the placebo effect. The placebo effect proves that reality alone can alter physical reality, even changing body chemistry without real medicine. In many cases, the placebo, or the sugar pill, actually created a tangible real-world change despite it not actually having the ability to do so. It's as if belief or desire itself created that outcome. Then we have the law of attraction. The law of attraction is the belief that you will attract into your life whatever you focus on. If it's positive, it'll be positive. If it's negative, it'll be negative. The way thoughts seem to attract outcomes is eerily similar to how machine learning algorithms adjust based on inputs. When one goes looking for something specific, for whatever reason, they are statistically more likely to find that something. And if the simulation operates on the manipulation of probability, then focusing on an idea might actually increase its likelihood, just like training an AI model to recognize patterns. Lastly, we have probability. Some people report uncanny manifestations, thinking of someone and then instantly getting a text from that someone, or money appearing exactly when needed. If reality was purely random, these occurrences shouldn't happen as often as they do, but they do. If reality is an interactive simulation, then our thoughts might be modifying probability from behind the scenes. So if you feel like you're powerless in this world, and that everything seems to go wrong for you, maybe it's time to change the way you're thinking. It seems as though we can actually somehow modify the odds in our favor. So is the universe just an advanced probability engine responding to what we search for? Or have we discovered a backdoor into the simulation's code? I really don't know, but I hope you find what you're looking for. Recently, a friend and I randomly had a conversation about Princess Diana. Later that day, a person I had never seen before or since just so happened to walk by wearing a Princess Diana shirt. Was this simply a coincidence? Just an extremely rare and remarkable circumstance without an apparent causal connection? Perhaps I only noticed it because I talked about her earlier in the day. Nevertheless, coincidences like this stand out, and I'm sure all of you have experienced some of them yourself. Now, is this evidence of the simulation updating to more closely align with our thoughts and preferences? It's like when you learn a new word and then you hear it everywhere, or you get a new car that you've never had before and then you see it all over the place. The amount of coincidences humans come across is, at the very least, questionable. It strikes me as odd that so many coincidences all occurred on this single planet. We're perfectly safe in the habitable zone, with the perfect mixture in our atmosphere to sustain us. Here's another one. During a total solar eclipse, the moon lines up exactly with the sun, obscuring it completely. That doesn't sound too remarkable or coincidental until you realize that the sun is 400 times larger than the moon. And amazingly enough, the moon is 400 times further away from the sun. It's mathematically stunning that it aligns so perfectly. Or what about the fact that when water freezes, it becomes less dense? Again, this doesn't sound too remarkably coincidental, but the fact is, this detail has allowed all life on Earth to survive. Water covers most of the Earth, and chemically it is one of the strangest. Other substances get more dense when they are frozen, but liquid water is the opposite. Because of this, when water turns to ice, it floats. Why does this matter at all? Well, if ice didn't float, but instead sank to the bottom, all water would eventually have frozen over and killed all life within it. The multitude of ice ages this planet has gone through would have killed all life in land and in water. Our evolution would have completely changed or not happened at all if not for this strange detail. Another example is how the single highest point on Earth, Mount Everest, amazingly enough has the lowest oxygen levels that human life can tolerate. It's as if it was exactly measured out to perfectly allow for humans to climb it. Now, I could go on and on about the interesting coincidences and synchronicities that our reality has to offer. So let's instead end this section with one more personal example of mine. It was about a sushi knife. I've never owned one of these tools before, nor did I know they existed, until I randomly had a dream about finding one in my kitchen drawer. Waking up, I thought, that's weird and random. I wonder if that thing's real. Now, this thought never left my brain. I didn't say it out loud. I don't watch any cooking shows. I didn't search up any dream meanings. It was just a dream and a thought. Well, later that day, I got an ad on Twitter for a sushi knife. I can't explain this. How did I go from never hearing of, talking about, or using an object to dreaming about it and then getting an ad for it? This is something I did not know existed until I had a dream and I thought it was something I made up. I honestly have no idea. The world has so many strange coincidences and synchronicities. It really makes you wonder. Here's a reason to consider the simulation hypothesis. Think about the incredible advancement of technology. In just the past few decades, we've seen unbelievable growth in the field of computer science and virtual reality. This advancement is called Moore's Law and was proposed by Gordon Moore, one of the co-founders of Intel, back in 1965. Essentially, he discovered that the number of transistors on a microchip will double roughly every 2 years with minimal rise in cost. This has held true for decades and has exponentially changed the world around us. What was science fiction has become science fact. Think about it. Semi-autonomous robots, artificial intelligence creating full songs, videos, and photos, completely simulated digital worlds, advancing graphics every few years. The world of technology is rapidly improving, and at a certain point, we're going to have to ask ourselves, why couldn't we create a simulated reality in the future? What was completely unbelievable 10 years ago is nothing now. What's it going to be like 50 years from now? 1,000. Consciousness is defined as the state of being awake and aware of one's surroundings. It's one of the most familiar parts of all of us, and yet also the most mysterious. Since the dawn of time, philosophers have asked, what is the purpose of consciousness? Why do we need consciousness? These deep philosophical questions have challenged the greatest minds throughout history, and thanks to the simulation theory, we might actually understand its purpose and why we need it. Consciousness is an interface between the self and the universe using all of our senses. The only reasonable explanation for consciousness's existence is that it is there to be an experience. Keep in mind that consciousness doesn't provide an evolutionary advantage that we know of, so what is the purpose of it? Either there is a role of consciousness at work that we don't know and haven't theorized yet, or the experience that consciousness provides is a function we serve, as in a product we create, an experience we generate as human beings. We are the ones creating this experience, and that is what consciousness is. Now, this is where things get uncomfortable, and again, if you're kind of lost, just stick with me. In philosophy, a qualia is defined as an individual instance of subjective conscious experience. Put simply, a qualia is the breeze of wind against your face, the taste of water, the excitement we feel when great news happens, as well as the fear created by bad news. All these experiences of consciousness are what we produce, and an individual experience is called a qualia. As I mentioned earlier, consciousness is something that we create that is not necessarily for us. Who do we create this product for? Who receives these created qualia algorithms that we produce? We don't know. But what we do know is that we are creating this consciousness, this experience, and that we apparently don't have any use for it. So the only logical next step is to surmise that this product serves something else. Which begs the unsettling question of who or what is this product for? If you haven't already made the connection to the simulation theory yet, let's break it down in the simplest way possible. When you are playing a video game, let's say Grand Theft Auto, is the character in the game you're playing as experiencing qualia, or is it ourselves? They do what we want them to do, and they act out the actions that we tell them to do, and by extension, we are gaining an experience through them. That is the qualia. They aren't gaining it, we are. The video game character goes through an experience, but their experience is very different from the experience we, the player, receive. That space between the character in the game and us, the player, exists in this gray area where experiences of the player and experiences of the character combine to form some type of consciousness. This is what the simulation theory believes consciousness is. Consciousness is that strange connection between us, the guiding voice in our head, and the experiences we live and feel on a day-to-day basis. It's the product we produce for whatever is on the other side of the simulation. That product that we produce, we have a very similar connection to that in games today. It's extremely rudimentary, but we are already seeing technology begin to blur the boundary between us. When riding in a roller coaster as a character in a VR game, we feel the gravity of the roller coaster. But where's this gravity coming from? It isn't real, and yet it is. It exists somewhere in the space between the character that is riding the roller coaster in the game and our minds occupying the mind of the character. The gray space between us, that is consciousness. It's easy to imagine how in the future this experience will become grander. More experiences, more feelings, more qualia generated. For us. Video games are a $1 trillion industry currently, and this is all based on the small amounts of qualia we experience from them today. Just imagine the future 10 years from now, 100 years from now, 1,000 years from now. The demand is there, the desire is there, the money is there, and the interest is there. It's inevitable. Based on the simulation theory, the simplest explanation for the existence of consciousness is that it is an experience being created by our bodies and actions, but not for us. Just like a video game, we create incredible outputs of sensory experience, qualia generating machines. And just like a video game, our input, our product, is most likely for the benefit of someone or something else experiencing our lives through us. Another interesting concept is the brain in a vat thought experiment. Let's say a mad scientist knocks you out and removes your brain from your body and places it in a vat. The vat is filled with life-sustaining liquid, and the mind is connected to a supercomputer that provides it simulated experiences by inducing electrical impulses identical to those your brain normally receives. It's an outlandish thought, but remember, this is a thought experiment to get you thinking. So your brain is nourished and your mind is stimulated. Your brain is functioning just as it normally would, but instead of being inside your skull, it's inside of a vat. If this happened, you would have no way of knowing that your experiences were not real, as your brain would be receiving the same inputs as though it was your normal body. This thought experiment illustrates that our subjective experiences could be entirely simulated without us even realizing it. And honestly, who knows? We could be living out our lives right now as brains in a vat, as we currently have no way to prove that we aren't. DNA is a self-replicating material that is present in nearly all living organisms. DNA is, in simple terms, nature's hard drive, capable of storing, replicating, and transmitting massive amounts of information. Everything from your physical features to your likelihood of dying from a certain disease. It's the incredible secret behind life, and for as much as we know about it, there is still so much more that we don't. Researchers in New York incredibly found a way to use DNA like an actual computer's hard drive, by successfully storing, replicating, and retrieving several digital files. And no, this isn't a joke. These scientists were able to transfer real-world information into binary code, and with the help of a DNA constructing startup company, they were able to implant that data into DNA as well as retrieve it. Amazingly enough, this means that DNA is not only storage for biological data, but in fact a form of digital storage for any data. It is estimated that 1 gram of DNA can hold up to 215 petabytes, which is equivalent to 215,000 terabytes or 225 million gigabytes. Essentially, DNA is the world's greatest storage device, and we are walking around with massive hard drives of data and legacy within us. DNA is, in a way, our own personal memory card for whatever this game of life is. But it somehow gets even crazier from here. That data and information that they were able to place inside of and retrieve from DNA wasn't all they tested. In fact, they also placed malicious computer code into those physical strands of DNA. Their aim was to show that computers working in gene sequencing were vulnerable to attack, and that a malicious code implanted in DNA could in fact attack those computers. But they might have also inadvertently revealed that what we perceive to be biological reality is in fact computer code. Our very DNA has the capability of carrying malicious computer codes and viruses that could infect other computers and perhaps even one day other humans. It really makes you wonder about all of this. Life, existence, the simulation theory, the very thing that constructs us, the DNA inside of our cells, can store and run computer code as well as viruses? What exactly are we? Are we nothing more than advanced computer code in a simulated reality? How could a simulation possibly be run? Think about it. The amount of energy required to render something this vast and detailed must be tremendous, almost unfathomable. Thankfully, we have the numbers to look at it. We know that a single gram of DNA can store 215 petabytes of data, which is equivalent to 215 million gigabytes of data. But let's take this further. If DNA can store our data, what about the world around us? To render all this reality, we're going to need far more storage than the massive amount stored inside of us. Well, now we have a super compelling theory of how to simulate a simulation. First of all, you need to understand what a quantum computer is. Don't worry, I'm going to make this as simple to understand as possible. So imagine regular computers as chefs who cook one dish at a time following a recipe step by step. Now think of quantum computers as super chefs who can make many recipes simultaneously and quickly figure out the best combination of ingredients. Regular computers use basic switches called bits. These are like light switches that can be either on or off. But quantum computers use qubits, which can be both on and off at the same time, so they can be in two states at once. Because of this, quantum computers can explore lots of options at once, which can make them incredibly fast at solving specific problems that today, with regular computers, could take decades or hundreds of years to figure out. The current issue is that controlling these quantum bits is still a little bit tough. It's like trying to tame a wild horse. Scientists are currently working hard to figure this out because once they do, it could lead to a whole new era of super fast computing. Now let's tie all this into the simulation hypothesis. In 2017, a pair of physicists authored an article that revealed something truly incredible. Using the computational approach known as Quantum Monte Carlo, or QMC for short, led to the discovery that QMC had the potential to simulate a quantum computer. So what does this mean? Well, the argument they built was that even the mere storage of data, a few hundred electrons, would necessitate an absorbent amount of computer memory. So much, in fact, that it would surpass the total number of atoms in the entire universe. All this to say, the data that makes up our reality, our world, our lives, is possible by use of the storage in atoms. Meaning everything existing today could be simulated data, and we now have a possible explanation for where that data is stored: in the atom. John Wheeler was an American physicist who worked on the Manhattan Project, the hydrogen bomb, collaborated with Einstein, and even invented the term black hole. But what I'm talking about today is that John Wheeler made the groundbreaking observation that rather than everything being a particle, everything is instead information. In 1990, he suggested that information is fundamental to the physics of the universe. He called this it from bit. What this means is that everything in the physical world has, at the very bottom, an immaterial source and explanation. I know that's wordy, but what that means is that truth is something created rather than objectively apprehended. Reality, beliefs, perception, that is the truth to everything in his opinion, and ties directly into the simulation theory. This potentially simulated reality is controlled by you and everyone around you. The world is literally what you make it. He believes that reality is what we accept as true, and what we accept as true is a reflection of our beliefs, which are shaped by our perception of the world. Essentially, the truth is a mixture of what we believe and what we perceive. It's the same way you have an entirely different worldview than someone else. You both exist in this world, but perceive and believe in totally different things. Your reality is true, but so is theirs. Reality is what you make it, and it's what we accept as truth. Here are some direct quotes from John Wheeler. Someday surely we will see the principle underlying existence as so simple, so beautiful, so compelling, that we will all say to each other, how could we all have been so stupid for so long? He continues, I don't know whether it will be in 1 year or a decade, but I think we can and will understand. That's the central thing I'd like to stand for. We can and will understand. I do take 100% seriously the idea that the world is a figment of the imagination. Some people may not like the idea that we live in a simulation, and I get it. It's a disturbing and troubling concept. They may argue that if we live in a simulation, and therefore our lives don't have meaning, I just don't agree with that. Whether reality is real or simulated, the life you are experiencing is real, and the thoughts and feelings you are having are valid. Even if we are nothing more than sim characters for someone else, that something else is still here with us. Our experiences are shared between us and them. Really think about that for a second. There is honestly no one closer in all of existence than them to us and us to them. An experience is still an experience, whether it actually happened or not. If it made you feel something, well, then it was real. Do we truly have control over our destinies? It's a hard question. If this is all simulated and everything around us is controlled and manipulated, why would they not do the same to us? Is any character in a Grand Theft Auto game free to make their own decisions? I don't think so. But if there was a way to break free, what would it look like? Can we ever truly be free? Or is free will an experience in imagination and not something that actually exists? Interesting stuff to think about. There's a video game that came out quite a few years back by Telltale Games called The Walking Dead, and it had one of the most powerful and memorable stories ever made. It followed the story of a man named Lee who took care of a young girl named Clementine during the zombie apocalypse. The storytelling, characters, and experience that game delivered was such an incredible high. Thinking back on this experience after doing so much research into consciousness and the simulation theory, I can't help but make the connection that we as humans are trying to create our own qualia, our own connection to a simulated character. These developers and storytellers are trying to create consciousness for ourselves. We are building our own simulation to give us what we ourselves produce. Let's talk about the information catastrophe, a concept discovered by Dr. Melvin Vopson. Every year, humanity creates 10 to the power 21 bits of information. That's a lot of information. Our planet has 10 to the power of 50 atoms. This is even more information, and this includes everything that makes up our planet. The atmosphere, the oceans, the biosphere, everything. The information catastrophe is that the growth rate of digital information we are producing is about 33% year on year, and we are not deleting any of it. At a 20% growth rate, we are going to make more bits of information than all of the atoms on the planet in 340 years. At that point, we will overtake the number of atoms on the entire planet with digital bits. At a 50% growth rate, we will exceed the number of atoms on the planet in 150 years. This information catastrophe will mark the point at which the maximum possible digital information has been created, as well as the maximum power at which to sustain it. The digital information production alone will consume most of the planet's power capacity, leading to ethical and environmental concerns. We are literally changing the planet bit by bit, and it's an invisible crisis. The number of digital information seems truly unstoppable. Dr. Melvin Vopson says that the theoretical endpoint we are going to hit, if we don't do anything, is what led him to the conclusion of the simulation hypothesis. We've been creating these digital bits for half a century, from the 1970s onward, and we have already created an astronomical number of bits. If we continue to grow at this rate, it really makes you wonder, could it be that maybe we are already in some kind of digital virtual world? It's as if there is a limit to the amount of data the simulation can handle or render, and at this rate, within the next 150 years, we're going to reach that limit. What happens? Think about the time scale of the Earth. It's been around for billions of years, and we've never even come close to meeting this information threshold. Only now, within the last half a century, has technology advanced so rapidly. We are dashing full speed to a goal that potentially was never meant to be crossed. Our rate of advancement is staggering. All this within about 50 years. Looking at all this, it's not far-fetched to assume that an advanced civilization, or even ourselves in the future, could reach the technological level needed, where we can simulate our world or the whole universe in an indistinguishable way from reality. Let me hear all your thoughts below, and if you enjoyed this, like, subscribe, and click the bell. Until next time, never stop searching.